As we all know, Assassin's Creed is a massive series. There's currently 13 games in the series, with a 14th coming this year in codename Red, and that's not even including all of the spin-off games. But like any massive franchise in any medium, when the universe becomes this expanded, it's hard to keep continuity and consistency with each project. Assassin's Creed has become an incredibly inconsistent series in terms of pretty much everything as of late. Gameplay, storytelling, general design, and formula. The games don't feel as connected as they used to, and the series has lacked a solid direction for quite a long time now. And it certainly did not used to be like this. When the series first started with AC1 in 2007 to Revelations in 2011, it felt very consistent with a clear focus and direction. The games built off of each other and kept making improvements in each continuous game. Even if there weren't massive changes from game to game, these 4 games still felt connected. That goes for the storytelling too, as stories were told over multiple games, both with Altair and Ezio, and the modern day arc with Desmond. In fact, you could even lump AC3 in with those games as well, since it also continued the modern day arc that started in the first game. But my point is, there was a clear plan and structure to these games, and gradual progression in each one. Compared to now, where it feels like the series lacks an overall sense of consistency and progression. Stories rarely, if ever, cross over into the next game, with of course the rare exception of Valhalla and Mirage, and the games don't really build off of and improve on each other. Instead, each game kind of just does its own thing now, some of which having completely different styles and design philosophies. For example, the RPG games, and then having a game like Mirage that's more of the traditional style of AC game. But my point is, there's no linear progression with each game in the series anymore. The games don't build off of each other anymore like you would see in other big game series. Now, each game pretty much does its own thing, and that's how we end up with games that are missing important mechanics and features that we had in the games over a decade ago. And ultimately, I think a big reason for this is because Assassin's Creed is now a series that has multiple Ubisoft studios all working on different types of games for the series at the same time. Back when the series first started, it was only Ubisoft Montreal working on Assassin's Creed, led by Patrice Desilets and his team. The same people, for the most part, were working on each game, hence why there was a consistency to the games and a clear progression in each successive one. They were building off of their previous work, and they had a clear direction and vision for the series. But once Ubisoft split up their Montreal studio to work on different games at the same time, and started having other Ubisoft studios like Quebec work on Assassin's Creed games as well, that direction and consistency, I feel, was lost. Let's use the Batman Arkham series as an example here. Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and Arkham Knight were all developed by Rocksteady Studios. Those games are consistent, each one builds off of the previous one, and makes improvements. That's because it's the same studio, same people developing each game. They have experience, they know what works, what doesn't, what they want to improve, and what they want to remove in each new game. In a lot of ways, you could compare that to how Ubisoft Montreal worked on the first 3 or 4 Assassin's Creed games. But when you have multiple studios and different developers working on sequels to games they didn't originally make, that's how you end up with regression within the series. A prime example of this is Assassin's Creed Unity and Syndicate. Syndicate has some really weird regressions from Unity that don't make a lot of sense. Taking away the manual jump, stripping out some of the unique moves and parkour animations from Unity, creating an entirely new combat system when they could have just built on what was already there in Unity. These things happen because the people who worked on Syndicate are not the same people who worked on Unity. Ubisoft Quebec developed Syndicate, while Unity was developed by Montreal 1. If that team at Montreal was allowed to make a follow-up to Unity, you probably don't see some of those weird regressions and design choices. But there's no no form of consistency because there's so many different studios now working on the series at the same time. Origins was made by Montreal, Odyssey was made by Quebec, Valhalla was made by Montreal, now Mirage was made by Bordeaux, and Codename Red is being made by Quebec. Odyssey doesn't feel like a sequel to Origins because it doesn't build off of Origins, and Valhalla doesn't build off of Odyssey. If anything, it's like Valhalla is a sequel to Origins because both were made by the same team at Ubisoft Montreal, and Codename Red is going to be the sequel to Odyssey because that's being made by the same team at Quebec. It's just a mess. Rather than just having one team and the same people working on these games so we can have clear direction and progression in the series like we did with the first 4 games, we have a bunch of studios all doing their own thing and making very different types of Assassin's Creed games from one another. But the reason Ubisoft does this is because with multiple studios working on AC games, they can pump out these games way quicker. If we only had one studio in charge of Assassin's Creed, it would be years in between games, like you see with other series, like Insomniac's Spider-Man or God of War with Santa Monica. I wouldn't mind that, honestly, if it meant getting better games, and games that actually improve on one another, but I don't see Ubisoft ever doing that. Obviously, more games equals more money, and if you can have all these studios working on different AC games at the same time, you can have a new Assassin's Creed game releasing every year or two. Assassin's Creed is kind of like the Call of Duty of single-player games. Again, Call of Duty is another series that has multiple studios working on games at the same time. I don't know, maybe having multiple studios developing games can work really well if there's strong direction, oversight, and planning, but I feel like that's probably a lot more difficult to do when you have so many projects in the works at the same time, all by different studios and people, which I think is evident if you look at the beginning of the series where there was a clear, strong vision and plan, to now where it's like each new game is different from the one before it. Even if they are of similar style and mechanics, there's still so many inconsistencies between the games. Like Origins and Odyssey are of a similar style, they're both meant to be more focused on RPG elements, but those games still feel completely different to me. Odyssey has a different vision and certain design choices that clash with what was done in Origins. That's especially true with Valhalla and Mirage as well. Sure, some things feel similar, but the games themselves are still totally different in a lot of ways. Maybe the inconsistency isn't such a bad thing sometimes because you can appeal to different audiences and players of the community, but I think the series overall has just gotten so messy. There's no clear progression in each game anymore, and Assassin's Creed has become extremely inconsistent. Kind of makes one long for the simpler days. And it's not even just the gameplay that gets affected by this either, it's also the story. It's hard to tell long, arcing stories through multiple games in the series when each one is being worked on by a different studio and a different group of writers. Especially with the modern day, since those storylines typically carry over through multiple games. Now I think that's part of the whole point of AC Infinity, that way we can have the entire modern day story centralized in one place and hopefully have a well thought out, planned story, but I think that can also be a reason why some of the storytelling in this series has regressed over time. It's become so diluted and worked on by so many different writers now. Each game also follows a new setting and new character. What we got with Basim's story in Mirage is very rare, where we actually got to see a character story through 2 games. We haven't really seen anything like that since Ezio, so it was really cool to finally get a little more continuity in the stories of these games, but I don't see that becoming more of a common thing going forward. The point is though, overall, Assassin's Creed as a series has become very inconsistent, and inconsistency breeds divide in the community and a lack of direction for the future. Assassin's Creed has become so big and so diluted that it's lost its identity. I believe part of the reason for that is having multiple studios all developing AC games at the same time, but that's of course just one of many factors. Let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments. Has Assassin's Creed become inconsistent, and what do you think needs to be done to fix that? As always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and consider consider subscribing to the channel if you're new. A special thank you to my members for supporting me, and other than that, thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.